rentals. If your goal is to have that cash come in and you think you can add tremendous value to it that increases that cash flow every month, then maybe landlording is the right path for you. And for those people, then doing it yourself is probably the best way to go. And then as you scale that business up and you've learned the intricacies of it, then you start hiring people to help you. And that hiring can either be internally or outsourced, but it's still hiring. But you don't want to do that too soon. As with any business, you don't want to scale it before it's ready. And I think there's a certain amount of learning that has to happen as a do-it-yourself landlord before you want to go and hire that property manager.
Welcome to Racking Up Rentals, a show about how regular people, those of us without huge war chests of capital or insider connections, can build lasting wealth acquiring a portfolio of buy and hold real estate. But we don't just go mainstream looking at what's on the market and asking banks for loans, nor are we posting "we buy houses" signs or just looking for, quote, motivated sellers to make lowball offers to. You see, we are people-oriented deal makers. We sit down directly with sellers to work out win-win deals without agents or any other obstacles and buy properties nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm Jeff from The Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. If you're the kind of real estate investor who wants long-term wealth, not get-rich-quick gimmicks or pictures of yourself holding fat checks on social media, this show is for you. Join me and quietly become the wealthiest person on your block. Now let's go rack up a rental portfolio.
Hey, thank you for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. Show notes for today's episode are at www.thoughtfulre.com/E61. Please do us a big favor and hit the subscribe button in your podcast app right now. It really does help and make sure that not only you don't miss the next episode, but it helps send a message to other real estate entrepreneurs who are looking for this exact type of content, so the platforms share it with them. Onward with today's episode. So in today's episode, I've got an interview with Laurence Jankelow. He is one of the co-founders of Avail, and you may have heard of Avail before. It is a online property management software, and it does everything from helps you advertise your units to find and screen tenants and keep those tenants over time. And it's really a platform designed for smaller landlords without hundreds and hundreds of units. And I was excited to have Laurence on the show because when we are out there racking up rentals, well, we need to then manage all those rentals we've racked up. And who better to talk about the process of managing those than somebody who really quite literally has visibility into many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of landlords and their challenges and their strengths and their opportunities. And it's a really rare perspective that somebody is able to see so many different types of landlords and just be able to offer such a broad perspective. So in this conversation, you're going to find that we talk about all sorts of stuff, from kind of why he even has a passion for smaller time landlords and why he believes in do-it-yourself management and when do-it-yourself management does make sense for somebody versus outsourcing to a property management firm. He talks about some of the things that he sees his clients experience with their acquisitions and the effects of COVID on everything, landlord-tenant law, and a whole bunch of other topics. So enjoy this episode with Laurence from Avail. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Very excited.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm a big picture kind of guy. Let's start at the high level. Give us a sense for who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good place. My name is Laurence Jankelow. I'm one of the founders of Avail.co, which is an online resource and suite of tools for do-it-yourself landlords to manage their rental properties. So started as a landlord myself, and my partner and I, who started the business with me, we recognized we needed these tools for ourselves, and so we quit our jobs, and that's what we did. We built these tools.
Nice. All right. So this started from a place of you being an investor and really truly experiencing the need for something different than what you were able to find yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is not 8 years ago, when we were looking for stuff to help us, there was really nothing geared to a landlord who may only have 1 to 9 units. We were kind of left there without any resources. So figured we'd build it ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to get into a lot of questions about property management and stuff like that, but tell us about your life as an investor. Is that still something you are actively doing now?
Yeah, I'm still active. I mean, by no means am I a large real estate investor. I've got 6 units. So two buildings, they're both 3 flats here in Chicago. Had them since, I don't know, basically 8, 9 years ago now. And I love them. I love spending time on them personally. I enjoy it. I enjoy having tenants. Not every person is geared for that kind of thing. Not everyone likes to interact with people or be responsible for a safe home for others, but I actually get a lot of joy out of that. So love doing it. I'm always looking for more. So I'm really picky on the buildings I buy. So I'm always looking for a really good cash on cash return. And sometimes you just have to be patient on those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's it like to try to find that in Chicago? Is that actually where you are shopping?
Yeah, that's where I'm shopping. Chicago is really tough. So you in Chicago, like things are really expensive. So I look at the gross rent multiplier a lot here. If your audience is familiar with that, great. If not, it's really kind of the multiple you apply to rent to kind of get a sense for the purchase price or how much the property is worth. And so, two things come out of that. One is I'm always looking at when I buy a place, what can I do to increase the rent? Because then you apply Chicago's rent multiplier to it and you're increasing the value of the property. But then the other thing on that is the higher the rent multiplier, the less cash on cash you return. So there's a huge trade-off and balance between finding a good place that I can add value to and then getting it cheap enough where the return is good enough. But Chicago makes that tough. But there are gems out here.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. And as you may know, we're kind of off-market focused in our approach here at Racking Up Rentals and the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. Is that what you have done yourself as well, or do you look at market listed properties? Or
yeah, I do both. I'm strictly on the numbers, so it's honestly a lot easier to make those numbers work when it is off market, right? You're not paying as many middlemen or women to help you find the property and all those things. So I like off market properties for sure. You can get them a lot cheaper, and the numbers then work. Of course, if I can get one that's listed and on market, but the numbers to work, I'm kind of ambivalent on those things.
Yeah, yeah. So thinking about property management, then, as I understand it, Avail is a platform that allows landlords to manage their own properties, right? So I guess with that, I assume that you have a belief in the idea of DIY self-management rather than outsourcing. Is that true? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, possibly strong beliefs in that area. Well, for me, it started, I would have used a property manager when I first got started. I didn't know what I was doing. So to me, I went looking for one, and it's actually really tough to find one. If you only got 1 unit, or for me, I had 3 units, then they're not really wanting to help. It's not their core business. They really much prefer landlords who've got 10-unit building, like a building with 10 units or 100 units in total, because they're trying to dollar cost average their time and all those things. So a lot of them refuse helping you if you're really small. So that was part of it. And then the other part of it is like, there's no way to get better at something if you don't dig in and do it yourself. So for me, I looked at that as an opportunity for me to really learn the nuts and bolts and figure out what it is to be a landlord, what the requirements are, all of that kind of learning. So it was very tactile for me in that way. And then the other thing is just from a cost perspective, it's like I mentioned, I'm in Chicago, so it's hard to find great deals. But if you can remove any kind of middleman, the numbers work out better. So if you're willing to do it yourself and do a little bit of sweat equity in the management side of it, then the numbers can work out better, as opposed to what's traditional here is you pay a full month's rent to find a tenant, and then you'll basically pay an equivalent of another full month's rent for them to collect the rents for you. So you're losing 16, 20% of your total rent by using a property manager. And for most landlords, that's enough to what was going to be a profitable business to now not be profitable. And if that's how it's going to be, then you shouldn't even be a landlord anymore if it's not going to make you money. So a whole bunch of factors led me to really be a strong leaner towards doing it yourself, for sure.
Yeah. And so if you suddenly, like say next month, had 20 units instead of 6, would you still be wanting to do it? I mean, maybe you're a little bit, right, not the best person to ask the question, since you were the owner of the technology that enables you to do this. But is in your mind, is there like a threshold that says, you should graduate to something outsourced at a certain point? Or
Oh, there's definitely at some point, yes. Of course, technology is that, as you mentioned, is that enabler that allows you to keep going for longer on your own. It's that thing that gives you the ability to scale at cheaper costs. So if you don't have technology, yeah, the second you hit I think 20 units, 30 units, it's honestly too much for one person. So you need to start figuring out how you then scale the management of that business. You can either outsource to a property manager, or you start hiring people internally to help you. Neither one of those are going to be great cost-wise. Of course, if you can use technology, then maybe that threshold goes up to 100 units, 200, 300 units. And so we look at Avail as kind of that enabler that lets you do it yourself, learn the easiest way, keep most of your money for as long as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got landlords who've got 300, 400 units on our platform using us, and I think they're happy with what they have and how they're managing it. So technology goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the reasons that I advocate for self-management is, and I think you kind of touched on it a few minutes ago when you said you don't get better at things you don't really practice at, right? And I was previously kind of the mentality that I want to buy these properties, I want to put them in somebody else's care and somebody else's hands. And, at one point I had a mentor who told me, he's like, if you really want to be a real pro as a financial or as a real estate entrepreneur, this is definitely a competency that will serve you well to have. And at that point, then we took that advice and brought it kind of back in-house and have been developing that competency in-house. And I'll tell you, one of the things that matters a lot to me, and I'm curious if you see this with your clients too, is I distinguish often between being an entrepreneur and an investor. And I feel like an investor is kind of a more passive mentality generally. That's kind of a broad generalization. But as an entrepreneur, I like to have more control. I like to not necessarily literally have my fingers on things, but I like to have my fingers on the pulse of what's going on with my portfolio and the people in the portfolio, tenants and things like that. So to me, like that, the idea of sort of DIY self-management versus just outsourcing it to somebody else is very appealing from that perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong approach for people. It depends on what your goals are when you enter the asset class. So if they have a goal of being a passive investor, honestly, I don't know that being a landlord is probably the right way to go. We like to believe it's passive, but it's probably anything but. And if your goal is to just have extra income coming in and you don't want to put in any effort and you want your money doing the work for you, then maybe a REIT is better for that person. The risk is lower, right? The reward is therefore also lower. So it depends on the goals. If your goal is to have that cash come in and you think you can add tremendous value to it that increases that cash flow every month, then maybe landlording is the right path for you. And for those people, then doing it yourself is probably the best way to go. And then as you scale that business up and you've learned the intricacies of it, then you start hiring people to help you. And that hiring can either be internally or outsourced, but it's still hiring. But you don't want to do that too soon. As with any business, you don't want to scale it before it's ready. And I think there's a certain amount of learning that has to happen as a do-it-yourself landlord before you want to go and hire that property manager. I tend to also think about it as, for the property managers I've looked at in the past, it's not their money. They don't treat it as their money. And you have to kind of get a sense for what they're looking at, what it's like to be a property manager, so you know how to manage them, right? Because if you don't know, then you're just not going to be able to manage and control that property manager the way you need to be successful in that business. So I think there's a path where you can skip do-it-yourself landlording, but it's not usually the wise path.
Yeah. So on this podcast and in our community here, we're very acquisition focused. Real estate investing or real estate entrepreneurship is a vast sea of information and a vast sea of like sub topics, I guess. So we're very focused on acquisition and, as you know, Offmarket and a lot of seller financing and things like that. So when people, like when you see your clients who are focused on buying and they're in buying mode, from the perspective of property management, what are some things you feel like people should be focusing on during acquisition and maybe focusing on more than they are?
Oh yeah, so many things. I mean, where you make your money is on the purchase for sure. Like that's going to dictate all of the success of that property down the road. So obviously purchase price is important. That's a given, because then you look at what rent is going to come in out of that, and you start to map out your expenses, and you only want to buy something where at a price where you can make a return on it. And I don't think enough people will do those calculations. People should be calculating out what an expected net operating income is going to be. If they can get rent rolls from the current landlord and expense reports, they should get that factored in, and then start shooting for a target. Maybe you only want to buy properties that have 8% cash on cash return annually or something like that. You set a goal. That's number one. And then from a strict operational perspective, when you're buying, you certainly want to look at who the current tenants are. Are tenants, the tenants that live in that building, are they typically longer term? Are they typically shorter term? And by shorter, I don't mean like vacation rentals. Sometimes tenants live there for 5 years. Sometimes tenants live there for 1 year. It's a lot easier if they live there for 5 years and more cost effective. So you can kind of get a sense for the average tenure. Maybe the longer, the better, the easier it is. Look for deferred maintenance. That's something a lot of people forget to factor in from a cost perspective. Just go in, walk through the units, and take a look around. Look for water damage in certain spots around windows, on the ceilings, where it might be underneath a bathroom from a different floor. Deferred maintenance can really add up. That's probably one of the mistakes I made on my first building, was just not thinking about the deferred maintenance. And then, of course, look for opportunities where you can add value to the rental property. So if there's a basement that's not being utilized, and maybe you can turn it into a garden unit, there's huge value to get out of that. If you can add washer dryers in each unit, then you can increase rent. As we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, if you can increase the rent and you figure out what that rent multiplier is for that city, that's essentially what value you're adding to it. And then you can do a return on spend or return on income, return on investment calculation based on what the value is going to go up by. So all of those are important when you're looking into the building. Unexpected costs, future income potential, those are important. Yeah,
absolutely. I like to recommend that when people are looking at a income property acquisition, that they create 3 pro formas. One is literally what will it be like the day I take ownership. Number 2 is, with a few basic things I could do, there's probably some low hanging fruit of things I could do that would be improvements. Let's say then, a 30, 60 day pro forma, and then the longer term pro forma, which might involve, like you mentioned, renovating a basement or something like that to really kind of capture the full potential. But there's now, here's what I could do pretty easily, and then here's what I could really do in full, and looking at all 3 of those things separately.
Which I think is a really smart idea, to think about it that way, and then add in how much is it going to cost you for, let's call it phase 2 and phase 3, so that just know, do you have enough cash to make your 90-day plan work and your 2-year plan work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I would guess is challenging for a property management software company, because it's also becoming increasingly challenging for landlords, is evolutions in landlord-tenant law. And obviously that varies from city to city, town to town, state to state, but and maybe this is coming from the perspective of somebody who's in a market that's pretty progressive in terms of landlord-tenant laws, but it becomes like a full-time job for us, just trying to keep up with like what's changing and the newest regulations. And then of course, COVID, there's a lot of very timely things that they might not stick around forever, but they're measures and whatnot right now. So how does the evolution of landlord-tenant law, especially in a time of, kind of an unprecedented time like a pandemic and all the regulations that pop up as a result of that, how are you seeing that impacting landlords all over the place? And how does it impact you guys as a technology platform with clients in 50 states?
Yeah, so probably a lot to unpack there. The first one probably is, I'll just talk about how the pandemic's been affecting people, landlords, tenants. I think part of the issue here is most rental properties are owned by do-it-yourself landlords in the United States. So something like 8 million plus DIY landlords control around 24 million rental units. That's over half the rental market. But the stigma of landlords is that they're all huge multi-unit or 100-unit landlords, 1,000-unit landlords, or they're corporations, and that they're flush with cash and that they're greedy. There's this huge stigma. And so, what ends up happening in a pandemic like this, or is happening, is there's a lot of emphasis put on like, hey, just let's give the renters a break, and the landlords will just have to deal with it and eat the cost. And what ends up happening is you definitely want to give renters a break. No one's arguing for that. They can't afford to pay it. What are you going to do? But at the same time, most landlords can't afford it either. A lot of them are suffering the same things. They're losing their jobs. Most of them are just part-time landlords. It's a hobby. They're barely making any money on those rentals, and they can't pay those mortgages without rent. And so if all of a sudden they don't get a break, then those places are going to go into default, or they can't maintain them the way that they need to or want to. So there is a spiraling effect that can happen. So the first thing I think everyone needs to realize is, look, landlords are people too. Tenants are people, obviously. We're all in this together. There's got to be some way that we work together. And I didn't think we'd still be here now in November, worried like, okay, where do we go in the future? I thought by now maybe the pandemic would be over and we would return to some normalcy, but it hasn't. We've been in this since March, and best guess now is it's going to be through all of next year that we'll still be here. And we're seeing rising cases. There's going to be more unemployment happening, both the landlord and tenant side. So I think we're in for a lot more pain than we even experienced in the first six months of this. So that first step is we got to treat each other as people. If you're giving breaks for renters, there have to be breaks for landlords too. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses. That's where we're not the rich that everyone thinks we are. We're like, I make $100 a month on my rentals, net, some of them. So I can't afford to lose out $3,000 in rent. I can't pay those mortgages. So that's the first thing. I'd say like the second thing, when it comes to us specifically at Avail with our technology, we try to help encourage landlords and renters to do the right thing. And so when you get into a situation of changing laws, we look at it as our technology is there to help you navigate that path and educate you on what those laws are at the right times. All of our lease agreements have state specific lease templates, some of them city specific. So we try to help you navigate those waters as the best you can, and they're updated when the laws are updated. So you don't need to hire a lawyer for that. We're just there to guide you. But I think underneath all of that is, if you just are operating as a landlord with this mentality of, I want to give the best quality of life to my renters, the best I can afford to give, then those laws don't really prevent you from managing that business. You're probably already doing the things that the laws require you to do. Where it becomes a problem is if you're more of the kind of landlord that's trying to cut corners to save money, to keep more of the money in your pocket, and you're not putting the quality of life of your tenants first or even second. That's when those laws are going to get you, because they're there to design to protect those renters. And most of the landlords that we work with tend to be the kind of landlords who are thoughtful and caring. They recognize that there are human beings living in those rentals, and it's their onus to provide a quality life. So yeah. Our customers don't run into those legal issues as much.
Yeah. No, that's a great perspective, and I think you bring up such an important point, which I think is just kind of generally the idea of goodwill, and goodwill is something that you plant and then you foster it and you water it and stuff all the time, right? And that I think when people look at something like landlord-tenant law and think just generally like, oh, that's a very contentious topic, it can be, but I think in my own experience, it is definitely much less so if you have been for a long time cultivating just positive relationships, doing what you said you're going to do when you said you're going to do it, delivering your end of the bargain. And so that's been my experience so far. Is I have not really experienced too many people who are tenants, who are looking at the technicalities of the law and then trying to leverage those technicalities to their advantage. People seem to have been, so far, 9 months in or whatever we are, being very reasonable. And I think that is actually a reflection of kind of the idea of goodwill that you mentioned there.
Yeah, where you see it historically is on around security deposits, right? Landlords will try to carve away the security deposits to eat into it from the tenants and keep a lot of that money. And then a slew of laws came out around, well, how do you protect those security deposits? How do you make sure that it's being used for the right things? And so now landlords are required to provide receipts, or to the tenant when they keep a security deposit, required to provide a certain amount of notice. like if you were already doing the right thing, there's no change in how you're doing things. But if you were if you were going in and fixing something that cost you $5 and you charge a tenant $500, then yeah, you were doing the wrong thing. So you're going to get caught by that.
Yeah. Besides sort of the idea of showing goodwill and just doing the right thing, kind of as you look at all of your clients, if you were to sort them out between, okay, these landlords are doing okay or thriving in COVID times, these ones are hurting worse. Are there any other kind of, clear observations you can say, like, these people are faring better because of X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, not sure on like the landlord side. I feel like a lot of them are doing fine. Tenants want to pay their rent. Like they're doing their best. They want to pay. It's not like the tenants are holding the money, and if they don't have it, they don't have it. And if they do have it, they pay. And I think we've been lucky in a way because a lot of the stimulus that's come out has afforded tenants to pay rent. It's gotten them through some unemployment issues that may now be resurfacing. So you'd hope that maybe more stimulus would come about. But when tenants have been able to pay, they've been able to pay. We've seen that been spread across the United States everywhere. We've got 200,000 landlords and 400,000 renters on our system. So we get a significant amount of data that just shows tenants ultimately want to pay. Where it's the biggest impacted, maybe it's a wealth gap issue here, but the bottom 20% of rent. So, the average rent in the United States, something like $1,100. So it's the $500 rentals that tend to do worse than the other, like the $1,100 average. And I think that's a factor of kind of how the United States is divided maybe a little bit there. And so if there's opportunity to fix things, that's probably the area for people to focus more on. And I don't know what those solutions are. I wish I did, but that's probably where people need to look and start thinking about things.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I guess I'm not surprised to hear that. And in fact, I would go so far as to say encouraged to hear that. When I first got started, my mentality was like, just simply, if numbers work, I will say yes. There was no element of pride of ownership or anything like that in my thinking. And then I had, somebody with a lot more experience sort of encouraged me to have more of a focus on quality. And so we kind of started upgrading within our portfolio. And I really believe that having quality properties that are well maintained in good locations where there's high demand, like that academically made sense to me when I started doing that. But I feel like we're really experiencing the benefit of that now. Because I just think we've got quality tenants and quality properties. They appreciate the property. They appreciate us. It's just a well-run thing overall, which seems to be serving us well at this point, rather than just having a bunch of really random stuff that could run the gamut from, A markets to C or D markets or whatever, scattered all over the place. I'm really glad we've got kind of a focus on quality like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think quality is important. There's a sense of like landlords want to save money, so maybe they don't maintain as much as they could or should. In the long run, I think that costs them more because I call it, probably someone else coined this, but now I'm using it. I call it ding theory. So it's like if you see a car with a lot of dings on it, people who park next to it probably are going to ding it up more. And I think that same thing applies to rentals. If you don't paint every few years, if you don't touch up stuff and maintain stuff, then when a tenant's living there, what unconsciously they just don't create more wear and tear than they otherwise would. And if you keep it really nice and well maintained, they walk in there and they're like, wow, this is a beautiful place. And they're going to more likely keep it beautiful than if not. And you can prevent a lot of wear and tear just simply by helping them see how beautiful the place is. So proper maintenance, I think in the long term saves a ton of money.
Yeah, that's cool. So like I said before, we're really acquisition oriented here. In your role with Avail, do you get to see much visibility into your clients' acquisition efforts, or are they mostly they've got something kind of buttoned up and now that's when you guys come into the picture? If you do get some visibility into that, are you seeing much in the way of off-market and seller financing?
Yeah, no, not today. we don't do a whole lot in that space. So when landlords sign up with us, they've already got a property, or they're very soon going to have one. They've got like a closing date already, and they're exploring how they're going to manage it. So we don't get terribly involved, but because we've got so many landlords, they're often always asking us, I've got this property to sell. Do you know if any other Avail landlords are interested in buying? And so for years, we've been talking about creating like a 1031 exchange program just within the Avail network, which I think could be very fruitful for them. We just have not had any time outside of just growing the business as it is to invest in that kind of feature enhancement. So, but it's something that's on our radar and something we'd like to explore. We just haven't to date.
Yeah. We like to set up a dynamic when we're buying where we're a regular person and we're talking to regular people, without, of course, intermediaries like realtors and stuff, but just two regular people who are, as a result, are just on a level playing field. Nobody has a power advantage. We're just two regular people sitting down to talk. And as I was thinking about, our conversation here in advance, I thought, it's Avail type customers who are probably pretty much exactly like the kind of folks I like to buy properties from. I think, frankly, most of the people I buy properties from don't necessarily have any particular technology solution, but they are the, 1, 4, 5 unit owner, landlord, DIY, like to get their hands dirty, personal relationships with their tenants and things like that. And that got me thinking about selling. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some of the top mistakes that landlords make as they're preparing to sell their own properties? Like things they might do that sort of leave money on the table or don't give them the best, just the best possible outcome on the sale.
Sure. I mean, this list could be endless. So, I mean, and I think this is true for not just true for selling, but landlords who are also listing for a rental for a vacancy. There's a bunch of overlap there. So one is showcasing the property in its best light. I think a lot of landlords who do it themselves may not do the proper marketing on it. They don't take the right photos. They don't create the right amount of buzz or get the right amount of leads. They don't let the buyers walk through the units the way they need to. Maybe they don't get the tenants who currently live there to clean up a little bit. They don't incentivize them the right way to do that. There's a whole bunch in that area. I'd say also educating themselves on what a fair price is and how to negotiate. There's a lot that gets left there. Obviously, like, it's tough to find the right comparables to benchmark yourself at. I think what ends up happening for a do-it-yourself owner selling it themselves is the way they benchmark what they want to sell it for is what they paid for it. And so they'll take what they paid for it. Maybe they say, hey, look, I'll add 5% or some arbitrary increase to it just to pay off their mortgage and get some money for the next place. They're not doing a full diligence on what they could get for it. So a lot of times they'll leave a ton of money on the table there. If they live in the property, they may not have put themselves in a lease, in which case then it's really hard to justify what their real rent is. We talked about on this podcast already a couple times the gross rent multiplier as a proxy for value. And if you're not in a lease, then that's rent that's not contributing, or at least proven rent that's not contributing to the total value. Sometimes they aren't charging market rents for tenants. And so if you can charge market rents, then that buyer is going to when they run the numbers, then they'll be able to offer more. So I could go on for days. There's a lot in there that they could start to think about when they're selling.
Yeah. Do you find, maybe just anecdotally, most of your clients who are selling properties, is it because they just say, hey, I think I've had enough of this? Are they saying I'm trading up into something bigger? I'm just taking some chips off the table and taking my appreciation of my proceeds and moving on to do something different? Or what are some of the motivators and drivers, do you think?
Yeah, a lot of our landlords will end up like their long-term buy and hold. So what they'll end up doing is they'll try the BRRRR method, obviously. So they'll try to refinance and add to their portfolio. I think that's their first route. The second route is if they were more like an accidental landlord. So 2006 created a lot of accidental landlords. There's probably going to be a lot of accidental landlords created today too. So those are people who lived somewhere and then they had a life event, they needed to move out or something like that, couldn't afford to sell, they were underwater, there were no buyers available. And so they turned to renting. And so those people will sell when they realize, hey, I can make my money back and I don't really want to put all this work in. And so they'll typically sell, and they may be a little more emotionally biased. And so that's probably the largest reason why someone might sell. There is oftentimes they want to upgrade. So they might want to go from a 3-unit building to like a nicer 3-unit building, or maybe a 6 or 10 unit building. And then of course you just need the down payment money to do that. So there's a lot of that happens as well. But most of our landlords tend to be buy and hold, and we'll kind of use the refinance method to add more properties.
Yeah. That's what resonates most with me, and I think probably a lot of our listeners here as well. Okay, so I never really thought too much about the idea of accidental landlords. I mean, I guess I've bought properties from people who've become accidental landlords through an inheritance or some other kind of a situation, but if you are an accidental landlord and you're scrambling around saying, I don't think I can manage this completely by myself, and you start to look around for software, some type of support, like what would be like 3 things that you think would be that people should be focused on as they kind of look at the menu of options that may be out there for, whether it's technology type of help, a platform. If you go in Facebook groups and stuff, you see people are always asking, new landlords are always asking, like, what's the best way for me to collect my rent? What's the best way for, managing repair requests and maintenance orders and things like that? So if you could advise somebody and say, hey, here, whatever path you choose for this, here's 3 things you should really keep in mind as you are selecting something.
Yeah, well, I think understanding the paths is important, right? I think sometimes they may not realize, hey, maybe they should sell. That's always your first path. And even if you're underwater, that may still be your best path. You've still got to run those numbers. And so selling is always an option. It's just you may have to come to the table with money to unload the property. But depending on the nature of it and what you can get for rent, that may be the cheapest route, depending on when you bought and why you bought. If that's ruled out, then you've got, the renting is the other option, essentially. And in that, you've got 2 paths. You can make it a long-term rental, or you can make it short-term rentals, make it vacation properties. And maybe the vacation properties is a good path if you're okay taking a little bit more risk, putting a little more effort in. The reward's going to be a little higher. You're probably more prone to that depending on if your property's in a large city or more of a vacation spot, and then that'll be a little easier, but you can still do that anywhere. Of course, I like long-term rentals. I tend to gear people towards that. I think it's better for society, but also it's a good combination of risk and return for a landlord or for an owner rather. And in that case, if you're going to go down that path of like, okay, I couldn't sell it, I don't really want to put in all this effort for short-term rentals, what should I be thinking about as I become a long-term real estate investor? Certainly some sort of community, as you mentioned, is super important. So people flock to Bigger Pockets a lot to ask questions as first timers. We have our own community as well that people can go to and ask questions. I think that's a really good place to start, is just asking questions, going to Google, reading as many things as you can to get educated on what to do. I think if you're a first timer, one of the problems is you don't know what you don't know. So you've just gotta get out and started with your first search, right? What should I do as a new landlord? And then see where that spirals you. Yeah. Then the second thing you want to do is figure out a process. How am I going to manage this? What's my process for finding tenants? Where am I going to find them? Do I have a process for screening them? Do I want to create policies around this? Think of it as a business because you're going to have revenue, you're going to have expenses. You want to create processes for yourself to make it easier as you go and add to them. Keep it in a document somewhere, and as you go, you add more. There's a lot to do there. You want to start thinking about like, okay, what do I do about rents? How do I want to collect it? Do I want checks? Do I want cash? Do I want people paying with credit cards? How do I want it? And what kind of landlord am I going to be? Am I going to charge late fees? How strict do I want to be? And I've got recommendations on all of those, but the individual has to decide on those processes themselves. And then, of course, the last piece of it is, processes are certainly enhanced and made more fluid. I forget which one we want to go with there, by technology. And although this is self-serving for what we do at Avail, but you definitely want to leverage some sort of technology, even if it's Google's G Suite, right? And you get Google Voice with Google Docs, and you want something Now, I'm biased towards Avail, like the kind of technology we offer helps landlords operate their business. So if you're confused as to what process you want to do, our technology forces you into a process. It takes you to the exact right places you're going to need to find tenants. You'll create a listing with us. We syndicate it across the web. So you'll find tenants. We hook in a TransUnion to give you the credit reports, background checks that you need to make decisions. We help guide you as to what those right decisions are. We give you the lease template, so you don't have to go figure that out. You sign it digitally. Your tenants sign it digitally. It's stored online on the cloud for you, so you can access it. Your tenants can access it. We let your tenants pay rent via credit card or from bank account to bank account, and we let tenants submit maintenance online. All of that technology enables a fluid process for you. So you'd want to find some technology that matches the process you want to do.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great outline. I love the focus on process, because if you're making it up from scratch every time a new situation arises, you're gonna make yourself crazy.
Yeah, you just get a lot of decision fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you're out there racking up rentals, I guess at some point you're really going to have to figure out what to do with all those rentals you've racked up. So I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on property management and everything related to that. If people want to find out more about you, connect with you, or Avail itself, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Pretty easy. They can come right to the website to find out more about Avail. So that's avail.co, avail.co. And I love connecting with people too. So if they're looking for advice or want to connect with me one-on-one, they can reach me at my email, which is Laurence@Avail. So LAURENCE @Avail, AVAIL.co. I'm happy to connect with people. I love people reaching out to me. So come to the website, come email me. Let's start a conversation.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much for being here on the show. I really appreciate it, Laurence.
No, thank you for having me. This is great. I love chatting about what we do and rentals. So this is great.
Yeah, talking shop. All right. Thanks so much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. It's really not every day that you get to talk to somebody who just has visibility into so many landlord lives and experiences and businesses. And I got a lot out of that, and I hope you did as well. So that is it for today's episode of Racking Up Rentals. So show notes, again, as a reminder, can be found at thoughtfulre.com/E61. Please do us a big favor by hitting that subscribe button in your podcast app. And if you would be ever so kind as to just take a second to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, that would be fantastic. Did you know also that we have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs as well? It's true, we do. It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders, and we would love to have you join us over there. If you just type group.thoughtfulre.com into your browser, it will redirect you right to that group within Facebook, and you can hit the join button. If you like this episode, please take a screenshot of it on your phone. Just post that screenshot to Instagram and tag us. We are at Thoughtful Real Estate. So I will see you in the next episode. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.
Thanks for listening to Racking Up Rentals, where we build long-term wealth by being win-win deal makers. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.